little slower than I usually am. But then in truth, I'm not a very quick person anyway, so some of you probably have not noticed a difference at all. But I'm just getting over a bout of pneumonia, so bear with me as I take a few extra breaths and maybe appreciate them a little bit more than I did a week ago. If we have not met before, it is good to see you and meet you, and I'll introduce myself the way that my mother had it on my birth certificate. So on my birth certificate, she insisted that they give me the name Arthur Brian Kaunda Leander. No one knows me as Arthur. My mother never even called me Arthur. But the story is that to appease my father, there are a lot of stories that begin that way, right? My father had a brother who had passed before I was born. His name was Arthur. And he wanted one of his sons to be named Arthur. And to honor my uncle, my mother said, okay, I'll give our first son the name Arthur. But she never used the name Arthur. And somehow she did a mind trick on my father. He never used the name Arthur. So everyone knew me as Brian, as she insisted. But she also wanted me to have the name of Kenneth Kaunda, a leader from the African continent that she admired greatly. So I know y'all know a few things about me, but you did not know that I was given his name. What you also don't know is that I'm an Andres, and I know you don't know what that is. But I'll tell you, there's actually a monument to the 1763, what they called the 1763 massacre. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It preceded Guyana, where I'm from, where I was born. It preceded the Guyanas. That part of South America had changed hands. The colonizers fought between each other, and the strongest would win, and then the strongest would win, and the Dutch would pass it on to the Spanish, back to the Dutch, back to the British and such. And there was a revolution that hardly anyone knew about anywhere else. And there's a monument to it in Georgetown, Guyana, the 1763 monument. We also call it the Coffee Monument. Coffee was born on the African continent. They made a mistake bringing him over because he got some folks all riled up about their present situation. And it resulted in the unfortunate death of hundreds of white slave plantation workers and owners, and the liberation, even for a little while, of people who were not born there, not intended to be there, but found themselves in those circumstances where they had to come together and fight and form themselves in such a way that the region, which was called St. Andrews, became notorious, and the people of that region became notorious. They were dismissed as, and we would say, them Andrews people. And my family's name is Andrews. So if you ever meet somebody from Guyana whose name is Andrews, I assure you, they're related to me. We're rebellious people. I'll tell you about us. You'll tell us something that we know is BS, and we'll smile and be polite with you and share a meal with you. But that doesn't mean that we believe you. That doesn't mean that we trust you. It's just that we don't want you to know what we know. It's a little bit of my story. You will meet incredible people today who are panelists. Dr. Leander will not tell you that Bishop Leander flew in this morning, got here at 9 o'clock, got in a car and got here on time for this. They're esteemed people that if I asked them to introduce themselves, we would have no time for the panelists, for the panels. So in their own humility, they're not going to get up here and tell you all about who they are. but they're going to tell you a little bit about their story. And that's the goal of today. So I wrote a book, and it was launched in the beginning of this month. And it took me about 15 years of research. My doctoral dissertation was based on that book in 2014. And it was a study of churches across the United States who were defining themselves as diverse. In their mission statements, they were saying they were multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural, and diverse. And I thought, who are these folks? Because this is such a departure from the norm, isn't it? And what are they doing? What is inspiring them? And I had a wonderful dissertation chair. His name is Dr. Franklin Oilakome. His problem was that he was trained at the London School of Economics. They don't know when enough is enough. And so when I came about with my proposal, he said, Brian, this is going to be a mixed methods dissertation. And I said, Franklin, enough is enough. I hear that a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And he proudly said, well, I was trained at the London School of Economics. We don't talk like that. He says, you're going to get up there and you're going to do a quantitative assessment of these leadership practices like a good scholar. He says, but people are going to be reading your dissertations who are not scholars. And they're going to want to know, what does all of this mean? So when you collect all of this quantitative data, they're going to know, what are the stories behind this? So when you collect all of this data around these leaders' cultural intelligence and their leadership practices, then you go back to these leaders and you ask them to explain it. What does this mean? Have them tell their stories. So I went to two churches that were literally across the river from each other in Pennsylvania. And I asked these pastors who were renowned for their boldness in leading these diversity-oriented churches, as I would come to call them. And I said, what does this mean? And they told me their stories, and each of them says, but Brian, if you're going to interview me, you got to interview every one of my leadership staff. And so I was thinking, I want a done dissertation. When is this going to be done? Well, it turns out by the grace of God, I was the third person to complete the dissertation in the cohort. It took me less than a year and a half to complete all of that work. I don't know where the drive came from, but I remember those stories. And what they were saying to me, I'm not going to give you the whole story. I'd like you to buy a book. But what they said to me over and over again, Brian, I'll tell you one story. Mike Lianzo is his name. He doesn't mind me telling you this story. Mike is a white man from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who was leading a church, he and his lovely family, and they fell in love with a little infant black girl that they adopted. And she was very, very young when they adopted her. So they took a little while before they took her to meet the church, and they were excited that day that they were going to walk into church and introduce their child to their church family. And he says, Brian, I walked across the threshold of the church, and the moment I crossed the threshold of the church, I realized that although this is my church, this is not my daughter's church. He says it was profound. I didn't know I didn't know how to make meaning of what it is that I was feeling, but when I looked at my wife, she had the same look on her face. And when we talked about it and we shared stories, we realized we were just going through a moment of a shared reality that was not ours before we adopted this child. And the story goes like this. The church was ready to receive him and his family, but they were not ready to receive that child. He said he never seen reality through another person's eyes until he fell in love with a little black girl. And he said once he saw life through her eyes, life changed for him. And he realized in that moment, life had to change for the church. Because he wasn't crossing back over the threshold. And his daughter wasn't going to change for the church. The church would have to fall in love with her the way that he and his wife did. And today, that church stands as a testament. Living Water Church, if you ever visit that part of the country, take a look at them. But there were other stories. And I got a little deeper and I asked folk, I said, you got to tell me something deeper than this. You all had this intimate experience. Let's make a note. Intimacy is transformational. Intimacy with people who are not like you is transformational. We are never the same. We cross a threshold and cannot cross back. But he said there's one other thing. He said, I went back to the scriptures to try to make sense of it all. After all, I'm a Christian pastor, he said. And he said he stumbled upon a passage of scripture that he had read so many times before, but he missed something, and I'm going to tell you what it is. He says, Paul was speaking to the church in Corinth in this letter, and somehow felt the need to remind them that they were given this ministry of reconciliation. And he said, I missed it, but I had to read it again. That the ministry that was given to Paul was also given to them. This ministry of reconciliation. He says, I understood a part of that statement all along. That's why I became a believer. He says, I understood the vertical aspect of that reconciliation. He says, I understood that God, through Jesus Christ, has reconciled, created a passageway of reconciliation between me and the divine. He says, I understood that to be vertical reconciliation. I preach that every Sunday. I try to make sure that every message I preach points people to that pathway. He says, but I missed something in 30 years of being a pastor. He says, what I missed was the horizontal reconciliation. And he says, between the two beams of light, it looks like I missed the cross entirely. See, I've been telling people that there's a pathway between us and God, but I haven't been telling them that as part of that connection, we have to be reconciled to one another. He says, and I turned to a passage in the book of Ephesians, and again, I had another moment because I was reading past something that talked about, y'all probably read this St. Paul talking about walls of hostility that divide us. And he said, wait a minute, let me just try exegeting a passage of scripture here for a moment. Just for a moment as a pastor. Try that now and then, just exegete. You will find that Paul is talking about you and me. Walls in our hearts that divide us from other people. Walls that divide us from the divine. And the need for those walls to be, and this is a violent word, by the way, torn down. It is not a passive act. It's not even selective. It's not one where we say, okay, I am going to take this apart brick by brick at my own convenience. Because I don't know if you've ever seen a wall, particularly a wall that is intended to divide. Therein lies the problem. It is intended to divide. For all time. There are walls. It's a great wall in China. You might have seen pictures of it. It was intended to divide. The intention and the execution were so timeless that the wall still stands. And the only way that wall's going to come down is with intentionality. Could you imagine if that wall is a spiritual wall? Yeah. Could you imagine if the wall that divides you and me was constructed, not of flesh and blood, but eternal material that is intended to divide us from our inheritance with God and with each other? Then the work in tearing down that wall is going to have to be spiritual violence. It's not for the passive. Diversity-oriented churches are not being led by passive people. Amen. They're a generation of people. They're younger than most of us in this room, on average. And you got to understand, their lived experience of race and gender and sexual orientation and the walls that divide us socially, they've lived a different reality than us. Remember when they went to the 5th grade and the 6th grade, and they came home and said, "Mom and Dad, I met a new friend today." And that friend didn't look like them. That friend didn't speak English as a first language. In fact, that friend didn't speak English at all, but somehow they made a friend. They had a different experience than we did, many of us. And it's indelible in them. And that's their expectation. Now they're 20 and 30 and 40 years old, and they're walking into a church for the first time, many of them. And they walk in and they see people that just look just like them. And to them, that's destabilizing. They don't know what meaning to make of that. You and I are probably more comfortable in that setting than they are. So for us, it could be the norm. But for our children, and especially our grandchildren, they see the dividing wall, whether you see it or not. And they see that wall of hostility dividing us, and they say to themselves, "I don't see God in this. I see God in that friend who looks different than me, who just loves me because they can't even explain it. They just love me. And I can't explain why I love them." That's the experience that my friend Mike Lianzo had. So I hope you read the book. There is a powerful TED Talk. You might have seen it. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has a powerful TED Talk. You remember it? The Danger of a Single Story. Y'all want to write that one down if you haven't seen this one. The Danger of a Single Story. When I saw that for the first time, I felt seen, I felt summoned, and I felt sent. Y'all know that feeling? And it wasn't just her stunning presentation. You ever see somebody that you just can't take your eyes off of because you're looking at the divine presence manifested in a person? I have to listen to your story now. You've got my attention. Yeah, it has that effect. She says the problem with stereotypes, is not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. They make one story become the only story. I have a similar problem with a single storyteller. I have a problem with a single storyteller. Because a single storyteller with enough power, with enough position, with enough charisma, with enough confidence, can tell your story and my story well enough to convince us that their version of our story is the story. And so, like Bishop said, they're very tactical in how they do this. And the best of them use religion as a vehicle for retelling our story. And the worst of them convince religious folk that the story they tell is coming from the divine. So you got wicked folk in high and low places telling a story, a false narrative that a lot of folk are starting out going, I wonder if what he's saying is true. And then they wake up one morning and they go, feels true to me. And they turn to somebody who is just like them and they say, what do you think of that story? And that person says, I've been thinking about that story. It resonates with me. And they start to resonate together. Anybody play a musical instrument? They tune together, right? You go to the orchestra, before anything gets started, you hear this, what you think is a noise. But what I'm hearing as a musician, tuning, resonance. And you know when they're ready because they start to speak in one accord. Well, I also have been to a few middle school orchestras. And in one case, and this is really bad, you see, I have perfect pitch. And that is not a blessing. In one case, I won't tell you which one of my children, but it doesn't matter. They all went to the same school at around the same time. And they were playing in an orchestra, and the orchestra leader, the teacher, had bad pitch. So everyone tuned flat. The same flat. Middle school flat. And me with my perfect pitch, I had to sit there and endure that out of love. And then they played every piece flat. And folks still clapped. Yeah, but the tune that they're playing right now, it's flat, it's sharp. And it's wrong. And folk are still tuning to it. And I'm telling you something, if you don't correct that pitch, if your collective voices, if our collective voices don't play in the right key, this nation is going to be singing a song and telling a story that does not resonate with you. And there comes a point where it's too late. Because once the masses start playing that song, it becomes a new anthem. It becomes a new constitution. It becomes a new false narrative. Problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, it's that they are incomplete. This is what I believe DEI is truly about. It's not just about being anti-racist, but it is about being anti-racist. It's not about being anti-discrimination, but it is about that. More than that, it is about the freedom for each of us to be our own storyteller. You see, because particularly for those of us who are in this room, there are people who trust us and trust our story and trust us to tell their story. I believe God trusts us to tell the story. I forgot that I was sick. So let me talk about the legacy of a single storyteller. History is full of examples where those in power are constructing narratives or have constructed narratives that serve their vision for ideological supremacy. The doctrine of discovery gave Europeans power and theological license to colonize, to enslave, and to kill. American slavery was justified by a false narrative of black inferiority supported by law, religion, and pseudoscience. Women's exclusion from theological authorship has left generations of male-dominated visions of God and faith in Jesus. Chinua Achebe says, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. A single storyteller, especially one with unchecked power, can justify tyranny, erase memory, and shape generations of theological error. As we are witnessing with our own eyes, our own collective eyes, in this time, We are being deluged with a single story coming from a single storyteller. But you got to understand, that person is not truly a single storyteller. That person couldn't be in the seat of power that they currently occupy if there weren't people behind the story telling that person the story to tell. And still, there's still many of us sitting and waiting. What are we waiting for? Who are we waiting for? Audre Lorde reminds us there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And Bell Hooks adds, tell me what you know of your body, your church, your memory, and I will tell you where your story and mine intersect. Reconciliation is about resistance. The resistance that my ancestors knew very well. DEI is not only about kindness or equity, it's about resistance. It is confronting the theological idols and nationalism, supremacy, patriarchy, and such. It is saying, like Jesus in Luke 4:18, the Spirit of the Lord is upon us to proclaim release to the captives. Let me tell you a little bit about a book. If you go to the next slide. The one with the passage from Isaiah. Yeah. So, there are visions that inspire us. I don't know if any of you are dreamers. I have these dreams. I have probably about 3 in my memory bank that are almost as if I was there. So I'm counting them as a reality for me. They're real for me. And I had a vision, a literal vision, that looked like this. If you ask me what compels me. In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains and shall be raised above the hills. All of the nations shall come and stream to it. I pause there every time I read that part. All the nations streaming to it. Many peoples shall come and say, I love that too, many peoples shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that God may teach us God's ways, and that we may walk in God's path. Can you see it? You might want to take a moment and envision what this looks like today. There are a lot of mountains. There are a lot of kings standing on top of mountains, proclaiming themselves. Some of them bold enough to proclaim themselves as messianic. All you got to do is listen to what they're saying. Or listen to their followers. You mean, because oftentimes it's not the messianic figures that proclaim themselves to be messianic. It's their followers that proclaim them. And when a group of people in this nation are powerful enough to elect a president who cannot even hold a Bible straight, that's true, but claim that he's ushering in a new time in America, a new time that began in the old times, in the founding of America, as a Christian nation. And they're excited because they think that these are prophetic times. And then I look at this and I see the mountain of the Lord, and it don't look nothing like that. So I want to leave you asking you, what do you see? And what story are you willing to tell? Stick around. I got some storytellers in the house with me today. and there are a range of people. But listen for the resonance. They don't all have perfect pitch, but if you listen carefully, you're going to hear music. Valerie, you might even hear some jazz. Please go to the next slide. Despite long-standing church traditions and practices in the United States that divide and limit people based on race, gender, and sexual identity, a growing number of churches, especially new church starts, are defining themselves as diverse. With this new millennium, diversity-oriented churches are among the fastest growing churches in the United States. Next slide. The research supports that these churches are growing across denominations. Go to the next slide. That these churches, when compared to majority white churches, are increasing, while majority white churches, which are the predominant churches in the United States, are declining. Mind you, other faith traditions are growing too. But these churches that are identifying themselves as multiracial, you see multiracial there because that is easier to measure. Visible diversity is the tip of the iceberg. So let me be clear. Race isn't diversity. It isn't the only way to measure diversity. It's the tip of the iceberg. What is below the surface is in your story. So people are telling your story about race and who you are based on race. They're pseudoscience. And enough of us aren't telling them what's below the surface. We're keeping our secrets out of a sense for need for safety. But the statistics say that a statistically significant number of people in this room are more than just race. And we're going to talk about that. Please go to the next slide. I love these kinds of graphs because you don't have to say anything. It's moving down. Worship attendance in the United States, declining, continues to decline. And again, we're not talking about a person's commitment of faith. We're only measuring attendance. Let's go to the next slide. It's going up. The growing presence of multiracial congregations. Although it appears to be plateauing around 2020, but I think there's momentum here. There's momentum, there's growth. This is our present reality. This is the reality of our children. Please go to the next one. This one is even more profound. If you look at what's in purple, you will see very quickly that the purple identifies these multiracial congregations, and they lead in almost every category. Growth over 5 years, high spirituality, or high spiritual vitality, high mission and vision. Oh, wait a minute, they're not leading the way among senior adults. But that's a generational issue. That's what I was talking about. But if you look at the next one, among young adults, we can't get away from this. People not born in the United States. That's an interesting one, right? And then finally, new attendees. This is a real phenomenon. Please go to the next slide. And the next one. You can go to the next one. What I want you to do, what I'm hoping that you do today, is that not only are you going to have an opportunity to listen to the stories of the panelists as they respond to questions that we ask of them, and they're esteemed. But there comes a point where we're going to ask you to ask some questions, inviting you into the conversation. There are people in this room that I need to thank before I get out of here, off of this. I want to first thank Jim Brenneman, the president of this esteemed institution. And hear me when I say this, it's almost too simple. But I'm thanking Jim for his leadership, period. I'm going to move on. Because Jim happens to be one of those people who didn't need any more than that. The faculty at BST. I'm relatively new around here, but I don't feel that way. I feel like I'm among family. Dr. Valerie Miles-Tribble, you all know who she is. Our students know who she is. They just awarded her for her teaching excellence. It is well-deserved. And I want to thank you for your sisterhood. And I'll move on, because you know what I'm talking about. Dr. Hannah Kang, this is my way of thanking all of you through thanking Dr. Hannah Kang. First of all, she has no idea why I'm thanking her. And she is so embarrassed right now. I can't even look at her. I'm not looking at her. Bishop, I'm looking at you, okay? I'm going to focus on you for the moment. But you know, I study people. And I got to an age, I won't tell you what it is, because to some of y'all I'm still young, but God knows that pneumonia makes me feel ancient. I got to the age where I thought, who is it that's young enough to be my own kid that feels like somebody whose story deserves to be told, who can tell my story, who doesn't look anything like me? And I got to tell you, there's one person among so many of you who I trust to tell my story. So I want y'all to say hi to Dr. Hannah Kang. And so many others. Okay, I gotta go take a breath of air. This is not a good way of ending this. I probably ran long, and blame me. Angie's coming up here. And I'm glad she's coming up here, because she and Sam, where is Sam? So, Dr. Angie and my mentee, Sam, he's a doctoral student.
Doctoral candidate.
Doctoral candidate, excuse
Whoops,
me.
I didn't know it was mic'd, sorry.
You clearly are. But I want to extend special thanks to them. I call them co-conspirators in this process. And so they deserve your applause and your respect and regard for the work that they've done. I'm done.